What's up guys, my name is Saib. Welcome to another episode. In this episode, as you can see, we're using VS Code just for the sake of change. And just a small tip on VS Code before we actually go into our episode. If you try to use the TD context and access most of the methods or the functions, you can see that there's no autocomplete for most of the methods. So you have to memorize these methods and actually just know them completely. So if you want to actually solve that, you can just simply go to the top of the GS document and just insert a GS comment, a JavaScript document comment, and simply you have to type at type in order to reference a typeset, and then we're going to interface with the HTML5 Canvas and then element. So simply like that, we have this autocomplete for most of the Canvas API now. So if I just said context and then I called fill, I can see all of the functions that start with fill. So yeah, before the text editor didn't help us, so now it actually does. So yeah. Okay, so in the previous episode we've talked about colors and how we can use different color values in order to fill a shape or change the stroke of a shape or the outline. So in this episode, it's gonna be about colors, but it's a different one. We're gonna use multiple colors and just blend colors into each other with something that is called color gradients, either a linear one or a radial one. These are the two types that we can use in order to apply multiple colors to a shape or a certain area in our canvas. So yeah, if I just start by specifying or just drawing a path for a rect, for instance. So same as usual, we begin with begin path in order to distinguish this shape from the different shapes that we have, so that it has its own color, its own line width, same as we did in the previous episodes. Okay, so now if we called rect to specify a path, I'm just gonna give it our starting point will be 50 for the x-axis, for the x coordinate, and 50 for the y coordinate. Then we're gonna go with a width of 200 and a height of 50, for instance. So yeah, okay, as we expected, the rect isn't visible yet. We have to either stroke outline this rect, the path of this rect, or fill this one. So simply if I just called stroke to see our rect, now we can see it. So if we specified a different line width, say I want 5. Okay, now we have a 5 pixel line width. Let's call now line join, since we did this in the previous episodes, just to remember this one. So if I call line join to change how the lines are joined or the corners of a shape, by default, or in this one, this is miter, so let's change this to round. Alright, now we have a round line joins, or just simply the corners. Okay, so in the previous episodes we just did the fill style, and then if I inserted the hex value for red. We've spoken about the color values in the previous episodes. If you didn't see that one, I think you should, in order to know what color values can be inserted in the fill or the stroke one. So yeah, just to understand more about colors and everything. Okay, so then we have to call fill in order to actually see the filled color. Alright, so that's simply what we did in the previous episodes. Now let's say that I want to use more than one color. Let's say that I want this to have two colors. The first one is red, the other is green, and just to play with colors within this shape. And you should know that linear gradients applies to fill or stroke, same as color values for the previous episode. So yeah, let's go to linear gradient. Linear gradient is simply just a line. Try to visualize this as a virtual line, and then this virtual line has this color stops, in which each color stop just is for each color. So if I want to use two colors, I have to apply two color stops. So simply if we try to do this in order to actually understand it more, so if I just created a new variable and then I called it linear gradient for this linear gradient one. Okay, so then I'm gonna call the context, and then we have a method for the linear gradient which is called create linear gradient. Then the create linear gradient, we have 4 arguments, in which x and y coordinates for the starting point of that line. As I said, try to visualize this as a straight line. So the starting point for this line and the ending point for the line. So simply, if I want this gradient or the linear gradient to start from the beginning of this rect and until the end of this rect, simply I'm just gonna give it the x and y coordinates of this point and until the end of our rect, so that it covers our whole rectangle. So simply this point is 50 for the x-axis, x coordinate, and simply if now I'm gonna leave the y coordinates simply 0 for both the starting and the ending point of that line. Since I want this to be a straight line, I don't want it to be rotated. You should know that it can be rotated, and the way that it applies the linear gradient to that shape can be rotated. But let's just keep it simple now and just 0. And then I'm just going to specify an ending point, in which this point, in which is the ending one, is the 50 for the starting point plus the width, in which is 200. So this point is 250 for the x coordinates. And I'm just going to leave the y as 0. Okay, so now we specified a line for the gradient, for the linear gradient. Now I have to insert the color stops. That depends on how many colors do I want to see in this shape. So let's say that I want to see 3 colors. So we have to assign 3 color stops. This is simply by calling the linear gradient that we assigned with a new method, that is the linear gradient. Then I can call dot and add color stop. Okay, this color stops takes 2 values. The first one is an offset that specifies the offset of that color. Then if we said this is just a value from 0 until 1, 0 is the starting point and 1 is the ending point, and then we can specify a different offset between these 2 values. So let's say that I want the red to be 0.1 for instance, and I can give it a color in which is red. So simply if I inserted the hex for the red one, give the red the highest value, so then I can specify another color stop for the green. For instance, I can give this an offset of 0.75, in which is more than the half of this. Now we have this line, this is 0.5, more than the half of this, or the center of this straight line. Okay, so let's give it the hex of green. I'm going to give the highest value to the green color, or channel. So let's now call another add color stop. Okay, then 0.9 for instance. Let's keep the blue at the end of this rect. So simply by calling the hex for the blue one. Okay, now our linear gradient is ready to actually be applied to any shape. So if we said now, so now this fill style is assigned to red. I want to assign this fill style with this linear gradient. So simply I can just erase this red and call the linear gradient. Okay, so if I saved, now we can see that we have a linear gradient that goes from beginning of this rectangle to the end, simply by specifying this line. And you can see that we have 3 color stops, in which the red one goes from 0.1 until just blend into the green one, and the green blends into the blue one. So yeah, if we played with the offset, let's say that I want this green to be in the middle, kind of the center of, or the middle of this linear gradient, I can just say 0.5. Then you can see that this moves into the center. So yeah, simply, and we can play with the red one like that. So yeah, this is actually a simple one. Okay, so let's try to apply this linear gradient to a triangle shape. So simply, if we went to create a new shape in which is a triangle, as I said in previous episode, there is no built-in functions for triangles. So simply we have to do this with move to and line to, just a combination of lines. Okay, so if I call begin path again, since we're having this new shape. Okay, so then context, let's move to let's say 50 for the x coordinate, since let's stay at the same level for the x coordinate. Then we can go to 250 for the y. Then let's go with line 2, and let's go to stay at the same level for the x-axis, and simply let's go to 400 for the y. Now if you want to see this lines, we have to call stroke. Okay, so that's good. Now this stroke follows the line width of the previous one, but since we're using begin path, we can specify a line width for only for this shape or this line. So we can simply just say context line width, let's give it a 3. Okay, now this is the only one that has a 3 pixels for the line width. For the line width, this stays 5. So yeah, begin path. Simply. Okay. Now let's complete our triangle simply by going with line 2, and let's go to move it. Let's increase the x coordinate. Just go to 200 for instance and 400 for the y. Okay, let's now close our path to actually have a full triangle. Okay, nice. Let's give it the miter one, or which is the default line join, in order to actually have a sharp one, sharp corners. Okay, so let's say miter. Okay, nice. Okay, so let's create a new linear gradient that goes from the beginning of our triangle until the end of our triangle, from this point until the end, so that we can apply the color stops and fill this shape. Okay, so simply I'm going to create a new variable, then I'm going to call it linear gradient, and let's say 2 to distinguish this from the first one, and then context and call the same thing, the linear gradient one. Okay, now this starting point is simply 50 for the x coordinate, so I'm just going to say 50, and same as before, we're going to leave the y 0, since I'm using the y coordinates for both points 0, since I want this to be a straight line. We can actually just rotate this one, which in this case rotating the line is actually a good idea, but let's keep it with the straight one so that we can see the difference between, or so that we can actually refer to that one to see that both of them works exactly the same. Okay, so this point is simply just 200 for the x on the x-axis, which is the x coordinate, 200 and 0. Okay, everything works just fine. Now if I just added color stops, for instance, let's say that I want to, okay, let's call the linear gradient 2 and add a color stop. Okay, simply let's use 0.1 for this one. Let's begin with, let's start this one with a blue color, so we're given the highest hex value to the blue channel, or the blue value. Then I'm just gonna go to add another color stop, let's say 0.45, nearly the center of the line. And then we can give it a blue one, or just a red one. Okay, let's give it a last. We can add as much as we want color stops. We can merge 10 colors if we want, just by applying different color stops to this. 2 and color stop, and then we can go 0.85 at the end. We can just say lime for this one, because we used lime in the previous episode. Okay, so now our linear gradient is ready to be to use it in any fill style for any shape. So simply we can go and call the fill style, and simply I can equal this to the second linear gradient. So then we can go to context and fill. So yeah, okay, as we expected, the first one is blue, and then we have this red, and then this lime color, which looks like a green one. Okay, so yeah, that's simply the idea of linear gradients. We have this, try to visualize a virtual straight line, and then we assign a color stops to it, and yeah, then the colors blend into each other with an offset, certain offset for every color stop. Okay, yeah, that is everything you should know about linear gradients. Now let's talk about a more it's not more difficult one, but also just sometimes it can be hard to deal with. It's the radial gradient. So if I just try to comment that one, radial gradient. Okay, for the radial gradient, we also have a virtual straight line, but the virtual straight line goes between two circles, an inner one and an outer one, and then the colors are the color stops that goes in the virtual or straight line are between these two circles. So let's start to apply this one in order to actually see it. Okay, so let's say that I want to begin path, since I'm going to use a new shape for this radial gradient. Then I'm going to call rect function. Let's specify this rect at the end of our canvas in here, so we can just say 350 for the x coordinate, and just 300 also for the y. You can go with 120 for the width and 150 for the height. Okay, so to actually see this, we have to call stroke. We can use fill rect and stroke rect, same as rect, it's fine. So okay, now let's try to apply the radial gradient to this rect. So simply I'm just same as linear gradients, everything is exactly the same, but the difference between both of them is that this linear gradient is just a straight line that goes from from starting point until the end, that covers the full the whole shape. But this radial goes from the inner circle to the outer circle, that gives us this round gradient, something like the shiny thing. So yeah, okay, if I just said radial gradient for this variable, just okay, then I'm gonna call context, same as the linear, but in here we have to create radial gradient. Okay, so this takes 6 arguments, the first 3 for the inner circle and the last 3 for the outer circle. Okay, so for the inner circle, let's say that I want to give it an x and y, in which is the starting point, and then a radius for that one. The same goes for the outer one. So let's say that I want it to be inside this rect, so I'm gonna go with 400 for the x coordinate and 350 for the y. I'm gonna give it a radius of 0 because I just want it to be a dot that goes just to increase the virtual straight line within this rectangle. So simply, and now for the outer 350 and 350 works fine with a radius of 100. So okay, so now we have to so that is simply it. Now we have a radial gradient, so we have to apply the color stops for the virtual line between the 2 circles, in which is the one is here and the other is the outer circle. So simply I'm just going to call radial gradient dot add a color stop. Okay, let's say now I want to have just 2 color stops just for the change. Okay, so now I can go with let's go with the red one, the hex for the red, and then let's call gradient dot add a color stop. Let's give it at the end, give it an offset to be at the end. Okay, so let's give this one a blue, for instance. So simply give the highest value to the blue channel or the value. Okay, so now let's call fill style, same as the linear, and assign it to the radial gradient, and then fill this one. Okay, now we can see this round gradient that I was talking about. It's more like a shiny thing. If you see, this is the inner circle, which is the dot, and then that is the outer circle, and this is the virtual line between both of them with the 2 color stops, which starts from red and then ends with blue. But you can see that these two blend into each other, giving this purple shape. So yeah, simply that is everything you need to know about color gradients and how to apply multiple colors in a shape or any combination of lines like this triangle. So yeah, I'll see you on the next one.